Hello,
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are all of you
Oh,
doing?
pretty well. Just had a major downpour and now it's sunny.
Yeah, here too. We had one maybe about an hour ago, and then they're saying later this afternoon we're supposed to get more coming through. It's supposed to
Okay.
get cold tonight.
Yeah, pretty cold tomorrow.
So I was going through the course and the syllabus and the Pearson stuff just before class, and I have a lot of work to do on your course for the rest of the semester. Okay, so things changed a little bit which always happens as any teacher goes through a course. What they planned at the beginning of the semester changes a little bit throughout. So I've cleared my slate of all my other classes tonight so that tonight I can just spend like 2 hours going through your class. I'm going to redo the last few weeks of the syllabus, make sure everybody's on board with, what homework assignments there are, with what the lab assignments are, make sure the grade book is all up to date because I noticed there was weird stuff in there. There's tests from a previous semester that are in the grade book and all kinds of weird stuff. Um, so right now, your course is a little effed up. I'm sorry. Um, I will fix that tonight, I promise. Like I said, I cleared my slate. I really have to get all of that so that we're all on the same page, that we all have the same syllabus to work off of, and when all your assignments are due and all that for the rest of the semester. We've got, a month left, something like that. So that being said, today what we're going to do is go through the blood vessels and probably start in the lymphatic system a little bit. So we already talked about the blood, we already talked about the heart, right? And then we've got to do the blood vessels and the lymphatic system between today and tomorrow because you will have a test on those 4 chapters. Okay, they're all related. You'll have a test on those that will be posted tomorrow. So I went in and not only are things messed up in the grade book and whatever, the blood vessels PowerPoint that was in your Moodle page is not the one that I reduced, right? So it's got, I think, 118 slides, which is more than I intended. So I went in really quick, just about 10 minutes ago, and reduced that back down and uploaded the correct version. So I will be using the correct version today, which is uploaded on your Moodle page. So tonight, after I update everything, I will make sure to send out an email saying things are updated. If you've already opened PowerPoints and looked at them, please go in and check them again because I've reduced things. I didn't realize that means that the next few PowerPoints that I uploaded are probably all the long versions from the book rather than the ones that I pared down according to kind of what I'm going to focus on when I teach you. So all of that said, we will go ahead and work on the blood vessels PowerPoint for today and hopefully get into a little bit of the lymphatic system today. I did extend the deadlines for the homework and the quiz for the blood vessels and the cardiovascular system, right? So the homework I think is due tonight, and then the cardiovascular system quiz is due tonight or tomorrow night, Thursday night. And I extended everything a few days just because we haven't actually gotten to it yet. There's also a lab assignment on the lymphatic system that I'm going to have you guys do next week, between tomorrow and next Wednesday. But it's only coming up on half of your Pearson pages. I don't know why it's not coming up for everybody on Pearson. So that's another thing that I have to figure out. So I will figure out all these things tonight. I like I said, I make time in my schedule to make sure that I get all these things straightened out tonight, so that everybody's on the same page going forward. So that being said, do you guys have questions for me?
I just had a question about the quiz, but maybe I should wait since you pushed it ahead to ask.
Okay. Was it like a specific question about a problem?
Yeah,
or just...
that was on the I'm curious about. It was about women and anemia.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if anybody else has taken quiz or if I'm gonna do any damage after. It was like,
I know there was a question last week about one of the blood vessels, and I definitely threw that question out.
Okay, so it was about why do women have anemia more often than men or something like that. And we had discussed that, and I wasn't, the answers that it gave wasn't very specific to like if a woman is pregnant or, you know, having like menstruating. So
Mhm.
I'm not even sure if I got it or not. I was just curious about that.
Okay. So I'll look into that question tonight as well when I'm in
Okay.
Pearson checking
I'm
things
kind
out.
of curious by it also. So
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
So I've been trying to keep track of all my grades,
Mhm.
but a lot of them aren't posted.
Right.
Like I've only seen my grade for the first lab. None of the rest of the lab grades are on my page, at least. Is that the same with everyone?
It's the same with a lot of people. So I'm trying to figure out
That's
why
part
that
of the
is.
problem you're trying to.
Yeah, that's part of the problem that I'm trying to
Okay. I just
figure out
wanted
is
to
that
make sure.
there's
Okay.
grades posting and they're somehow they're not posting for everybody, which is weird to me. So I will
Okay.
get that figured out.
None of mine are posted either, Melissa. So
Yeah, and like
Something like-
a couple of
I
the
go in-
homeworks never posted, and so I just want to make sure that I'm still passing. Is basically what it is.
And the third exam only adds up to 10 points or something, right? For some reason, I saw that
Yeah,
and I'm like,
I
what?
think so,
That
yeah.
doesn't make any sense. The other exams are
Yeah,
60 like
same.
they should be. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm trying to figure out all that.
Okay. All right. Thank
Sorry.
you. It's okay.
So bottom line is check again tomorrow, and hopefully that will be all straightened out and you'll have a better idea of how you're doing. All right. Any other questions before we get started? Okay, so I will share my screen. Go to blood vessels PowerPoint. And apparently my internet is slow today too, which is great. There we go. So this is chapter 13. Like I said, we'll cover chapter 13 today and 14 today and tomorrow. And then you'll have a test on 11, 12, 13, 14, which is all related to the cardiovascular system. All right, so chapter 13, the cardiovascular system, we're still on. We're talking about blood vessels and circulation. So we've already talked about the blood, the fact that it carries oxygen and carbon dioxide. We talked about the white blood cells and that they defend your body, although we didn't say much about them yet. We did a lot with the heart. We did the dissection of the heart. Hopefully some of you were able to go back over the heart and see some of those features that we pointed out during lecture. Okay, so here is the vascular pathway of blood flow. So what we're talking about in this chapter predominantly is the systemic blood flow. So remember that in every circuit of the heart, every time the heart pumps, there is 2 cycles, right? And one cycle is the pulmonary circuit, which goes through the right side of the heart to the lungs and back. The other side is the systemic circuit, which goes through the left side of the heart to the body and back. What we are talking about here is the systemic circuit, right? The pulmonary circuit, that's all you have is the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs, to the pulmonary veins, back to the heart. What we're talking about predominantly is the systemic circuit. The fact that blood is leaving the left side of the heart and going through progressively smaller and smaller blood vessels to get to every nook and cranny in your body. Right. So here is the vascular pathway. Once blood leaves the ventricle, it goes into arteries. Arteries are big vessels. They carry blood away from the heart. You can remember artery and away, both start with A. They carry blood, whether it's to the body organs or the lungs, it's still called an artery. They branch into smaller vessels called arterioles. All an arteriole is a smaller artery. It's got the same exact makeup of an artery, right? It's just smaller in diameter. So you've got blood flowing from the ventricle into arteries, into smaller vessels called arterioles, eventually into the smallest vessels, which are called capillaries. We'll see that the capillaries are the tiniest vessels, and that is where gas exchange happens, right? That's where oxygen can diffuse across the capillary walls and all that sort of thing. This is where we get, you know, nutrients from the foods that we eat enter our bloodstream through capillaries. This is how we get oxygen and carbon dioxide to get into and out of our blood. Then from all those capillaries, so you've got arterioles and arteries and arterioles going to all these different places in your body. When they get to those different places, you've got capillaries. When the blood is in the capillaries, you're going to have exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. You're going to pick up nutrients maybe. Then that blood has to get back to the heart. So it flows from these tiniest little vessels back into slightly bigger vessels called venules. Okay. And then from venules, it flows into bigger vessels called veins, and the veins bring the blood back to the heart. Right? So veins and arteries are approximately the same size. Venules and arterioles are approximately the same size. They're just carrying blood in opposite directions. And this will become more apparent as we go through some of these slides. So if we're talking about arteries or arterioles or venules or veins, all those vessels have the same 3 layers in their walls. Okay, so this is not for capillaries, but any of the other arteries or any of the other vessels. They have a tunica intima, a tunica media, and a tunica externa. You can tell from the names which one's the inner, which one's the middle, which one's the external, right? Intima is the innermost, media is the middle, externa is the outer layer. The tunica media, the middle layer, is the one that contains most of the smooth muscle. So is smooth muscle voluntary or involuntary?
Voluntary.
No, smooth muscle is involuntary. We cannot choose to contract it. And part of what we'll see when we get towards the end of this chapter is that your brain constantly is getting signals about your blood and contracting or relaxing that smooth muscle to make your arteries and your arteries dilate or to make them constrict, right? To make them larger or smaller. So even though arteries and veins both have those same 3 layers, there are differences in them, right? Arteries have some different things than veins do. Arteries have a smaller lumen than veins. What that means is the part that the blood is flowing through, the empty part, the straw, if you will, is thinner or smaller than veins. And here's the reason. They have a thicker tunica media. Okay, they have a thicker layer of smooth muscle than veins do. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think arteries have to have a thicker layer of smooth muscle than veins?
Because of the influence of sympathetic and parasympathetic, they are contract and dilate.
Good. The arteries can contract and dilate. But why do you think that is? Think about where the arteries are and where the veins are.
Pump the blood. They have to pump the blood harder to get where they're going.
Okay. The arteries are leaving the heart, right? When the heart squeezes, when it pumps, it pushes the blood into the arteries. So the arteries have to deal with more blood pressure. By the time it goes through the arteries, through the capillaries, and it's coming back to the heart through veins, there is drastically less blood pressure. And we'll see that veins have to deal with that issue, right? That's a completely different issue. So the biggest reason that arteries have this thick tunica media is because they have to deal with more blood pressure. Okay, so they have a greater wall thickness than veins. Now, they're about the same on the outside. So if their wall is thicker, then that means the opening, the lumen, is smaller. And we'll see that that layer of smooth muscle regulates the diameter of the vessels. And Juliet's exactly right. The arteries can constrict or dilate based on a number of different cues that are going on in your body that we'll talk about. So here, often when you dissect something and you put it on a slide, you always end up with an artery and a vein right next to each other. Because if you think about it, arteries are carrying blood away from your heart to all the areas of your body. Veins are carrying blood back towards your heart. So for instance, in your arm, you have an artery running down your arm away from your heart. And you have a vein in that same exact location running back towards your heart. Right? Wherever you have an artery, you always have a vein running right next to it, right alongside of it. So here in this microscope slide, you can see an artery and a vein. You can see the artery has a much thicker wall than the vein, right? And veins are actually usually shaped like this. They're not round. Arteries are nice and round. It's a nice solid structure. Veins can they can flatten out a little bit more. They don't have as thick of a wall. And if you look to the left, here is a diagram of an artery. And if you look to the right, there's a diagram of a vein. On both diagrams, you can see the tunica externa, the tunica media, right? And the tunica intima. The biggest difference is that the tunica media is much thicker. It's a much thicker layer in the artery than it is in the vein. So the first arteries that you'll see coming off the aorta are elastic arteries. They're the largest arteries leaving the heart. So things like the pulmonary trunk, which we're not worried about right now, but the aorta and some of the major branches off the aorta, they have a large internal diameter, 2.5 centimeters. They're like an inch thick, you know, they're big. They have more elastic fibers than smooth muscle fibers. Okay, they're very resilient because they have to handle a lot of blood pressure. There's a lot of blood pressure coming through those arteries. So they're elastic, they can stretch when the heart beats, like when the heart pumps, and they can kind of go back to shape, recoil back to shape when the heart relaxes. From there, you have more muscular arteries. Muscular arteries are a little bit smaller. They're called medium-sized arteries or distribution arteries sometimes. Carotids are a good example of this. Carotid arteries lead up to your head and neck. And they distribute the blood to kind of different areas of your body. Compared to elastic arteries, their tunica media has more smooth muscle. So these are the arteries that really can dilate and constrict and really cause a big difference in your blood pressure, for example. And then blood flows into the smallest arteries, which are arterioles, right? Their tunica media only has a couple of layers of smooth muscle. They still have those same 3 layers. Their diameter changes in response to a lot of stimuli, such as low oxygen, and we'll talk about those stimuli later. The changing diameter alters the blood pressure and the flow. Okay? And then blood flows into capillaries. These are the only blood vessels whose walls allow for exchange between blood and interstitial fluid. They're only made of a tunica interna. They don't have 3 layers. They just have that thin inner layer. And the layer that makes up the walls of the capillaries is just 1 layer of endothelial cells. That's it. 1 cell layer thick. The capillaries are so small in diameter that red blood cells can only fit single file through them. Okay. The thin walls allow for things to diffuse in and out of the blood. So when things diffuse from the blood to outside the capillaries, it's considered interstitial fluid. Okay, inside the blood vessel, it's called plasma, right? The liquid of the blood is called plasma. Once it gets outside of any vessels, it's called interstitial fluid. So that's what this fluid is here. That's what they're talking about. So sometimes you're getting things like oxygen to go from the plasma to the interstitial fluid. Sometimes you're getting things like glucose to go from interstitial fluid into the plasma, right? So things are going back and forth depending on what's diffusing across that layer. But it's always happening while the blood cells are in capillaries. We have an enormous number of capillaries so that we have, a huge area. We can have this increased diffusion everywhere. And we don't just have 1 capillary connecting an arteriole to a venule, but there's a whole bed, there's a whole network of capillaries. And we'll see that, here's a better picture of it. So we have an arteriole here on the left, right, in red, and you can see the arrow showing blood flowing down. And you have a venule on the right, in blue, a small vein, and you have a capillary network between them, or a capillary bed, right? So it's not just this 1 capillary going between the artery and the vein. It's actually a bunch of them, a number of them. So you might have 10 or 12 of these capillaries that the blood can travel through. And what that allows for is while the blood is in the capillaries, that's when diffusion can happen, right? So the more capillaries you have, the more chance of things getting into or out of the blood, which is what you want. That's the whole reason that the blood is there. Before the blood gets from an arteriole to a capillary, there is this ring of muscle called a precapillary sphincter. So a sphincter is just a circular muscle, precapillary, before the capillaries. So there is a band of smooth muscle, and you can see where that is right here. Okay, you can see one right here. And all that that band does, it can either constrict and reduce the amount of blood that gets into that capillary bed, or it can dilate to allow more blood to get into that capillary bed. Okay, so you're controlling things at a very fine-tuned level. Oftentimes during exercise, you're increasing blood to certain capillary beds and decreasing it to other capillary beds, for example. So that is something that's controlled by autoregulation, right? The control of that sphincter, of that smooth muscle, is not something that you can control consciously. And so over here on the right is just what you would see under a micrograph or under a microscope. Here's a small artery. Here's an arteriole. And you can see all these little capillary beds. They're hard to see. They're pink between the different arterioles. So these small red ones are arterioles, and between them are the capillary beds. Okay. Then we have situations, so I'm going to skip this for a second and come back to it. So we have, from the capillary beds, blood flows into venules, and then it flows into larger, medium-sized veins, and then large veins. All of those, venules, veins, and large veins, all have the three layers, the three tunics. Okay, they're comparable to the arteries and the arterioles, except that they have a lot less smooth muscle, right? So they have much less smooth muscle in their tunica media. They do still have smooth muscle, but much less. Now, in certain situations, the blood flows from an arteriole into a venule without going through capillaries. And it's basically an alternate route of blood flow, so that the blood doesn't have to go through this capillary bed where things can diffuse in or out of it, but it can still get from an arteriole to a venule to get back to the heart. Any kind of alternate route like that is called an anastomosis. So multiple ones are called anastomoses. Okay. So an anastomosis is a joining of blood vessels, and it's to form an alternate route for blood flow. So you kind of have a bypass, if you will, right? So that instead of going through the capillaries and losing oxygen, the blood can go through this alternate route, and you don't lose any oxygen in that part of your body from the blood. There is one that's called the arteriovenous anastomosis, which bypasses the capillary bed connecting the arteriole to the venule, right? That's exactly what I was talking about. So instead of going from arteriole to a capillary bed to a venule, it's just like one direct vessel that goes from an arteriole to a venule. There are arterial anastomoses, where arteries fuse together before branching into arterioles. This ensures delivery of blood to the capillary beds of key areas such as your brain and your heart. So basically you would go from one arteriole to another and then to a capillary bed. It's just to ensure that blood is getting to capillary beds where you need a lot of oxygen perfusion. So places like the brain and the heart, right? And we'll see more of that in a minute as well. So I said arteries have a lot of smooth muscle to handle the amount of blood pressure that they have. Well, veins have a completely different problem, right? By the time the heart pumps the blood into an artery and it flows into a small arteriole down by your foot and a capillary bed, and then gives up oxygen and flows into a venule, and it's back into a vein, and it has to make its way back up your leg to your heart. By the time it's into that vein, there's not that much blood pressure in it anymore, right? It's been a while since the heart pushed. So how do you get that blood back to your heart? You're fighting gravity, right? Whether you're sitting down or standing up, that blood's going against gravity. It wants to go down towards the ground. Well, veins always have these valves in them. And the valves are in the innermost layer, in the tunica intima, and they prevent backflow. And so in the veins, you can get blood to squeeze from one valve up to the next. So the valves kind of section the veins off, right? So you've got section A and it can push up to section B and push up to section C and so on. The reason that this happens, or the reason that you have them, is that to return blood back to your heart, your body, your veins take advantage of muscle contraction. So imagine a vein in your leg, right? So you've got blood down here by your foot, and you're trying to get it to go up your leg towards your heart. It's fighting against gravity. Well, this vein has muscle on either side of it, right? This is regular old skeletal muscle. This is the muscle of your calf. So when you're walking around, you're contracting those muscles. And when you're contracting those muscles, they're pushing together, they're squeezing on that vein, right? Now, when they squeeze on the vein, the blood that's in there in the vein is going to go in both directions, right? It'll go up and down. But if you look down at the bottom here, that's where there's a valve. So that only allows blood to travel up. So the blood will travel up to this next section, right? And then as you're walking more, this muscle up here will cause blood to go up to the next section. And that's how you return blood back to your heart. Now, if you ever are going on a long plane trip, or you sit at an office all day at a desk, what does the doctor usually tell you to do?
It's either wear elastic stockings or move around.
Right,
Walk
move around, right? A lot of times they tell you to move around. This is the reason they tell you to move around. If you aren't using those muscles, right, you are not helping your veins to return that blood back to your heart. And so what can happen is the blood can start to pool at some of these valves. Okay, now, if that happens in your leg, you can get what's called a deep vein thrombosis in extreme circumstances. Now, a thrombosis is a blood clot. And you've probably heard of DVTs or deep vein thrombosis. What happens is if you are immobile for a while, the blood can start to pool in your leg and can even start to form a little clot. Now, the veins that are in your legs are pretty big in diameter. So chances are it's not going to block off a vein in your leg. But when you get up and move around, when you do start using those muscles, that clot can break free. And now that clot is traveling through your veins. And it can get lodged in a smaller vein somewhere. Usually what happens if you get a blood clot in your leg, usually where it gets lodged is near your lungs. And that gives you what's called a pulmonary embolism, right? That's actually like a little blood clot that gets lodged in your lungs. And that's one of the things that can happen if you're not moving around enough. And you'll notice that even those of you that might work in nursing homes or in hospitals, that they put those compression sleeves on the legs, right? Even my wife had C-sections for our kids, and so she was in bed for a day in the hospital without moving. And even for her, they put sleeves on her legs, which contracted. And what those are doing is actually pushing on those muscles and helping to return that vein back, that blood back to your heart, because you're not up and walking around. You're not easily returning that blood back to your heart.
So that's an IPC device. If I remember, the P must be something about what you were just saying. I'm not sure what it stands for.
Okay.
Squeezes your legs when you're bedridden.
Right.
Oh,
IPC, is that what you said?
I'm curious. IPC is what we call the IPC devices.
Huh.
I have to look it up now.
Yeah, exactly. Look it up and let me know what it stands for. But that's exactly what it's doing. So it's squeezing those blood vessels.
Yeah, it's intermittent pneumatic compression devices.
Oh, intermittent pneumatic compression. Okay, that makes sense, because it squeezes every certain number of seconds or whatever it is.
Intermittently.
Yeah.
Huh. I was always wondering what it stood for. Well, I guess I could have looked it up, but
There you
no
go.
reason to. We just called it IPC device.
Yep.
Thanks.
So figure 13.2 is just a structure of the types of blood vessels. Again, you can see arteries. You've got elastic arteries are the biggest, then muscular arteries, then arterioles. And on the left here, you have the large veins, the medium-sized veins, the venules. They all are composed of 3 tunics, the intima, the media, and the externa, right? But then when you get down to these capillaries, right, the capillaries only have a tunica intima, really. They only have one layer of endothelial cells. So you can see how much smaller they are in diameter than some of these arteries and veins. Okay. So Regulation of perfusion. Perfusion is how much blood gets into those capillaries, right? Because that's regulating how much oxygen you're getting a lot of times in the body, in those different muscles or in those different areas of the body. And it's affected by certain things. So tissue perfusion can kind of be thought of as blood flow. It's how much blood is flowing into any particular capillary bed. And they are, or it is affected by cardiac output, peripheral resistance, and blood pressure. So the goal is to ensure blood flow changes occur at the appropriate time in the appropriate location and without drastically altering blood pressure or blood flow to vital organs. It is accomplished through autoregulation, so things that we don't even think about, neural processes, which we'll talk about, the neural processes that go to these different areas of the body, and endocrine processes. Some of this is controlled by hormones. So it's controlled basically by cardiac output. That's how much blood is leaving your heart every time it pumps, or every minute. Peripheral resistance, how much resistance is in those blood vessels. So for example, if you have more clogged arteries, there's going to be more resistance. And it's affected by blood pressure. Okay. So autoregulation, these are adjustments that are made in the blood flow that are automatic. They're happening all day long, all throughout your body. You don't even realize that you're doing this. And they are local changes in response to changing tissue conditions. So they are changes not throughout your entire body, but at various points in your body. So it can control the blood flow in your left arm versus in your right leg, that kind of thing. It's that tight of a control. And we've got both vasodilators and vasoconstrictors. So vaso is just vessel, that's all that means. Dilators means it allows those vessels to get bigger, to dilate, and constrictors makes them constrict. And so there are different things that cause your blood vessels to dilate and different things that cause them to constrict all day long. Factors that promote dilation. We're talking about dilation of those precapillary sphincters, right? So there's the arterial precapillary sphincter, then the capillary bed. So you can either dilate those or constrict them, right, to change the amount of blood flow into those capillary beds. So what would make you dilate them? What would make you open them up? Well, if you have low oxygen, right, if your body detects that there's not enough oxygen, well, let's let more blood flow into those capillary beds so that more oxygen can get out of the blood. If you have high CO2 levels, the same thing. You want to get rid of CO2. So let's let more blood get into those capillary beds. We can get more CO2 into the blood to get rid of it. Histamine is a chemical that your certain white blood cells put out, and those will actually dilate your blood vessels, the histamines. And so a lot of times when you have like a cold or something, it triggers your immune system to put out histamines to dilate your blood vessels so that you get more blood, returning more like nutrients and more things to fight off whatever's infecting you. And the release of those histamines causes inflammation, right? And that usually makes us uncomfortable. That's what makes you have a runny nose, is because you're releasing those histamines. All those blood vessels in your nose are now dilated, and you have the sensation of a stuffy nose. And so you take an antihistamine. Nitric oxide is another chemical that can dilate blood vessels and makes them larger. It has to do more with DNA regulation. And then factors that stimulate constriction of those same sphincters and decreased blood flow would be things that are the opposite of those. So high oxygen, right, or low CO2, right? Those would cause the blood vessels to constrict a little bit more. If homeostasis is not restored, then the neural and the endocrine processes are activated. So in other words, if your body can't just constrict those precapillary sphincters and kind of get your homeostasis back to the normal state, then your body kicks in these other functions that it has, or these other processes that it has. Okay. So then we get into neural control. So if you're not getting back to homeostasis, part of what you have are these different pathways from your brain to your blood vessels. You have a cardiovascular center, which is in your medulla oblongata, which is your brain stem. This responds to changes in arterial pressure or blood gas levels to maintain adequate blood flow. So there is an acceleratory center and an inhibitory center, right, to either speed up your heart rate or speed up your cardiac output or slow down your cardiac output. if you have high blood pressure, right, what do you think you're going to do? Speed up or slow down your heart rate?
Is that speed up because the body is starving more oxygen, so
Right.
it pump more.
Good. So it'll pump more blood, right? If your arterial pressure is high, then you want to get more blood around the body. If the blood gas levels are detected at this point, so what they're detecting is oxygen and CO2 levels, right? If oxygen levels are low, you want more blood flow. If oxygen levels are high, you need less blood flow, right? So within the context of this cardiovascular center, there are different kind of different receptors that sense different things. One of them is a vasomotor center that controls, so motor is movement, so this controls how constricted or dilated your blood vessels are. Sympathetic stimulation causes vasoconstriction. So if you get stimulation from your brain that there's some sort of a threat, that automatically constricts your arterioles, which increases your blood pressure. Strong sympathetic stimulation causes venoconstriction, which actually constricts even your peripheral veins. And what they do is they cause an increase in peripheral resistance and an increase in blood pressure. So your blood pressure goes up if you're stressed, right? If you perceive something as a threat, which is a stress, that's going to, your brain is actually going to send signals to constrict your blood vessels, which will increase your blood pressure.
Okay, I'm confused by that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't, because I was going to ask you before, but then when you went on to the next slide, I thought that it explained it. But with like the fight or flight instinct, that wouldn't dilate?
No,
it constricts it to regulate it?
So think about
Like so that okay.
So you have the same amount of blood going through your vessel. If you make that vessel smaller and you're still pumping that same amount of blood through there, it's going to increase the pressure, right? If it's pushing the same amount of blood through a vessel and you make that vessel even smaller, it's going to cause an increase in blood pressure, right? And the reason that you're doing that is to try to get more blood around the body, to carry more oxygen, to maybe use your muscles
I was
more.
thinking that it would, because of your heart pumping faster, it would dilate, but it has to restrict.
If you're trying to,
I mean?
so that would happen if you're trying to restore homeostasis. This would be if you're fight or flight, right? Fight or flight, you're not worried about homeostasis. You're worried about getting enough oxygen around your body to either fight or flee, right? So that's, I guess that's where I didn't explain it correctly.
No, I get it now. I had it backwards, like that.
Yeah.
That it's trying to become regulated again, homeostasis. Yeah. Okay, I get it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So in this cardiovascular center, how does your body do that? Well, your body, I said, it's detecting these changes and trying to maintain homeostasis, and it does this through a few different types of reflexes. So these are just different kind of receptors that are in that cardiovascular center, right? So this is in your medulla oblongata. You have baroreceptors and chemoreceptors. Now, baro responds to pressure, right? Like a barometer measures the pressure of the air. So baroreceptor reflexes respond to changes in blood pressure. Chemoreceptor reflexes respond to chemicals. Chemo is chemical. So they're responding to changes in chemical composition. And both are regulated by negative feedback. So what that means is if your baroreceptors detect that your blood pressure is too high, they are going to try to dilate your blood vessels in order to bring that blood pressure back down towards homeostasis, right? So this is not during fight or flight. This is just during normal everyday. They are going to do that until your blood pressure gets down to a certain level, and then they're going to stop, right? That's negative feedback. So if your body wants your blood pressure to be 120 over 80, and it's up to 150 over 85, then your blood vessels are going to dilate until that blood pressure gets down to 120 over 80, and then they're going to stop. That's where they're going to kind of stay. Then if they start dipping too far below that, then they'll constrict a little bit to try to get your blood pressure back up. Chemoreceptors, the chemicals that they're responding to are generally hydrogen ions. And the reason they're doing that is because they're responding to pH, which is related to how much oxygen or CO2 is there. So essentially they're relating how much CO2 is there compared to how much hydrogen is there. which is a big, long mess of a way of saying their chemoreceptors are really just detecting how much carbon dioxide is there. If there's too much carbon dioxide, right, then your body wants to get rid of the carbon dioxide, so you're actually going to, again, dilate a lot of those precapillary sphincters to try to allow blood to flow into those capillary beds so that you can get rid of the carbon dioxide. Okay, that's generally what's going to happen. So where are these actual receptors that do this, that are sending the message to the medulla oblongata? Well, the baroreceptors are found in the walls of your carotid sinuses and your aortic arch. So those are arteries that are close to your heart, right? Your aortic arch is the blood leaving your heart goes directly into your aortic arch. Your carotids are branches off the aorta. So the baroreceptors are detecting the blood pressure close to your heart, and they're sending those signals based on that information to your medulla oblongata all day long. And your medulla oblongata is then sending signals back to your precapillary sphincters to adjust how open or closed those sphincters are, to allow blood to flow into the capillary beds. Okay, and then, right, so here again, just shows you what the reflex is. If you have increased blood pressure, it inhibits the cardioacceleratory center, it stimulates the cardioinhibitory center. It's going to slow down your heart rate, right? The results are decreased cardiac output. You have less blood going out of your heart. Widespread peripheral vasodilation, making all your blood vessels bigger, right? And all that those two things would do is lower your blood pressure. If these baroreceptors detect decreased blood pressure, which doesn't happen very often, it usually happens in an accident, in a trauma, that kind of thing is usually where you have this fast decrease in blood pressure. And it's going to increase your cardiac output, and it's going to actually constrict your blood vessels instead of dilating them. The atrial
I have a quick
baroreceptor.
question about
Yeah,
that.
sure.
Oh, sorry to
No.
interrupt you. When that occurs, when that like baroreceptor reflex occurs, do you know how about like in general how long that effect lasts for with the dilation and constriction?
That I don't know. I know it happens very quickly. I'm not sure how long it lasts for,
Okay.
because your medulla oblongata is getting these signals quickly all the time. So I would imagine that it doesn't last long. That your body's constantly adjusting how dilated or constricted those muscles are. So I'd imagine it doesn't last very long.
Okay. Thanks.
I have a question about that as
Yeah.
well. Is that you said that it constricts during trauma? Is that to prevent more blood loss, or is that from some other chemical reaction that happens during?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of it. Something about preventing blood loss.
Yeah, what you said that it constricts vessels during trauma. Usually, is that prevent more blood loss in an event like that, or for another reason?
Right. So usually because of a large blood loss, your blood pressure will drop drastically.
Okay. Okay.
So that's one of the reasons that your body would detect a large drop in blood pressure.
Dropping blood pressure. Okay, I missed that
Right.
part. Thank
Right.
you.
So what happens more often is that your body's detecting high blood pressure, right? We have that problem more often than not, is that our blood pressure goes up.
Yeah.
If it goes down, it's usually more of a traumatic event, right? It's not like, oh, okay, somebody's a little hypertensive or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I missed the part about the decreased blood pressure.
Yeah.
So I was thinking a trauma could be like anything. So I didn't know if you meant like a trauma where there was blood loss. Gotcha.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. You're welcome. So the atrial baroreceptors monitor your blood pressure at the end of the systemic circuit. Those are in the vena cava, right, in the right atrium. So that's just as blood is coming back to your heart. So that should be low at that point. And the atrial reflex occurs in response to the stretching of the wall of the right atrium. So if the wall of the right atrium stretches more, that means there's more blood coming back, which means the pressure is still pretty high in your blood vessels. And so that's going to stimulate the cardioacceleratory center, speed up your blood rate, or speed up your heart rate, I should say, which is going to cause you to push more blood out per minute, which will return the pressure back to normal. So again, here is kind of the the homeostasis, right? If you have increasing blood pressure, this is the series of events that's going to happen. What's going to happen basically is you're going to decrease your cardiac output, so how much blood is leaving your heart per minute, and you're going to dilate your blood vessels to bring your blood pressure back down to whatever the set point is. If your blood pressure decreases, right, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to increase cardiac output, so there's more blood leaving your heart, and you're going to constrict your blood vessel and hopefully get your homeostasis back by increasing that blood pressure. This top pathway happens more often than the bottom pathway, I would say. More often than not, your blood pressure goes above normal than it does below. And again, this is only those baroreceptor reflexes of the carotid sinuses. So it's only those reflexes that are in your carotid sinuses that are detecting blood pressure. Right? Then you have the chemoreceptor reflexes. Those are the other set of controls that you have that are sending signals to your medulla oblongata. And these receptors are sensitive to changes in carbon dioxide and oxygen, or the pH in your blood and your cerebral spinal fluid. These are located in your carotid arteries and your aortic bodies, okay, which is, again, blood leaving the heart. And the receptors are activated by a decrease in oxygen or an increase in carbon dioxide. Like if you have less oxygen than you need in your blood, or you have an increase in carbon dioxide, they're going to stimulate your heart to beat faster, right? And they're going to increase the pressure in the blood flow. You want to get more blood flowing around the body. If you have not enough oxygen and too much CO2, that's what you want to do. pH is a little more convoluted. Again, the pH you want to maintain about a 7.35. If it gets too acidic, you want more carbon dioxide around. If you, the carbon dioxide is converted to carbonic acid and dissolves in the blood to actually change the pH. So it's a roundabout way of measuring the carbon dioxide levels in your blood. In addition to these chemoreceptors accelerating your heart rate, right, and changing your vasomotor center, so constricting your blood flow or constricting your arteries, it's also going to activate your respiratory center to increase your respiratory rate. So because these chemoreceptor reflexes, because the chemicals that they're responding to are oxygen and carbon dioxide, in addition to either speeding up your heart rate or slowing down your heart rate to get those back to the normal levels, they're going to also send signals to your respiratory center to change your respiratory rate, right? If your oxygen levels are low, well, not only are you going to speed up your heart rate to get more blood around your body, but you're going to change your respiratory rate so that you're taking in more oxygen with your breath so that you can get more oxygen into your blood. Okay, so here are chemo.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So your pulse and your oxygen level is directly related. I'm wondering, and it's a little bit off topic, I guess, but yeah, how like an oximeter works when, you know, the thing that goes on your finger to get the O2 saturation level and your pulse. I've always wondered how that works. So I'm wondering what the connection is there.
So the connection, again, the connection is just that if the oxygen meter registers that you don't have much oxygen in your blood, you have below a certain amount, you can expect that person's pulse to be higher. No, you can expect it to be if all of this is working correctly. Now that's a big if, right? If somebody's in the hospital, it could be that they had some sort of accident. It could be that they have a disease. They have whatever going on. So maybe all this isn't working properly. Like maybe their oxygen levels are low because their body can't speed up their pulse to get more oxygen around their body.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it doesn't necessarily help you with the diagnosis, right? But it puts you in the direction of, okay, well, this person either is not getting enough oxygen into their body or can't get the oxygen from their lungs to their blood, right? So it narrows down the possibilities of what it could be. Yeah.
Interesting. My instinct was to say like that the pulse would be low, but that makes sense. It would be higher.
The pulse could be low, and that could be why you have low oxygen. Or, there could be some disconnect between your body sensing low oxygen and speeding up your heart rate. There could be there's different, like, which came first, the chicken or the egg, kind of.
Right. Diagnostics is just so complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So many things are related.
My goodness.
It's a web. It's not a pathway.
Yeah. Right. Thanks.
You're welcome. And so then,
I have a question. Sorry,
yeah, sure.
before we move on.
Yeah.
It's related to the capillaries and the veins. So I read this article that the 17-year-old guy got a hiccups and died from what do you call that? Embolism.
Okay.
Isn't it the hiccups is just right on the capillaries, which is very narrow and only single red blood cells could pass?
What was what is on the capillaries? I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
It said, when someone put a hiccups, is it just on a skin, which is just on around capillaries?
I'm just so sorry. I don't know what word you're asking for. Somebody put what on the capillaries? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. He said that, I don't know what's the word. He said the hickeys. It's, when someone sucked on the
Oh, a
surface
hickey.
of your skin,
Yeah,
it was
Hickey.
like bruised.
Oh,
The
Gotcha.
hickeys.
Hickey.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So this man died because of the hickeys, and it's like, how could someone get embolism through that? It's just doesn't make sense.
Teenagers are crazy.
My guess would be he had some sort of a condition already that nobody knew about because he was young. Like a lot of times people have, maybe a heart condition, but they don't know it because when you're a teenager, you seem healthy. Like you don't necessarily know that you have a heart condition. And maybe that somehow that pressure prompted a blood clot to form, because an embolism would be a blood clot that forms and then basically dislodges and goes to a smaller vessel in your body and gets lodged. So my guess would be that little change in pressure somehow caused, or the damage to the blood vessel. That could be it too. The damage to the blood vessel could have caused a clot to form on the inside of the blood vessel. And again, when that dislodged and started going through his circulatory system, it got lodged somewhere in a smaller vessel and it blocked it off. But again, my guess would be that he had a blood condition, maybe where he was more susceptible to blood clots than most of us are and didn't know it. That would be my guess. Because how would you necessarily know that at 17 years old? You're healthy and you're active and everything else. So that would be my guess, that the damage that was done to the blood vessels. Anytime you damage a blood vessel, it can lead to a blood clot. And we think of it like on the outside, like when you cut a blood vessel, it leads to a clot, but you can damage a blood vessel from the inside as well, and it can lead to a blood clot. And so that would be my guess, that the blood clotted and then went through his circulatory system to a smaller vessel.
Okay. Yeah, I was just kind of relating it to where the position of the hickeys usually around the capillaries, and to get embolism, it usually happens around the bigger vein.
Right.
So
my guess would be that if that blood clot happened in the capillaries, it flowed into a venule and into a vein, right, and maybe went through the right side of the heart and then got lodged near the lungs, right? That would cause an embolism.
But there's a possibility that such thing could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. It has to be exceedingly rare that it would happen, but I would guess. Yeah.
It's just, just thinking how dangerous that could be.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, I think there's more dangers to worry about than that. But yeah, it could happen. Sure.
All right, thank you.
I'm just wondering, is it more common that the body will kind of like encapsulate and get rid of a clot in a safe way than like the commonality of someone getting a blood clot? Is it like, doesn't the body have ways that it does deal with blood clots and like remove them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's definitely we probably have all had blood clots and not known it in our arteries and veins, and you're right, the body will deal with it. The body will send out chemicals that will break that up so that it does fit through your circulatory system, and then those little pieces get taken out through your kidney or by your liver when they get filtered by your liver. So yes, I would say more often than not, yes. There's probably blood clots that form that we never ever know about because they only get to be a certain size, and then there are other factors that go into breaking them down and we never know about them.
Okay, so that's like a common occurrence. I just wasn't sure. I'm having the sudden urge to like get up and take a walk like every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I know, it makes you wonder how you can go like 8-10 hours sleeping without any complications, now that I'm really thinking about it.
Right. Well, and there's a whole there's a lot of interesting things about like what happens to all your vitals when you're asleep, like what happens to your heart rate and your breathing and all that stuff. It all changes for that reason because you're sedentary for 8 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
So everything changes. That's why like your body temperature changes and all that stuff changes when you're asleep.
It checks and balances. Yep.
Yep, exactly, which is crazy. Our body
So
is
interesting.
crazy.
It really
the,
is.
the adjustments that our body makes all the time are amazing. Okay. So if those chemoreceptors, baroreceptors, those neural pathways don't necessarily restore homeostasis, we have hormones that can also regulate our cardiovascular system. In the short term, epinephrine and norepinephrine stimulate cardiac output and peripheral vasoconstriction. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are what we call adrenaline. Both of them are. I don't know. I'm not going to get into the details of the differences between norepinephrine and epinephrine, but they both upregulate everything, right? They're both, when you get that rush of adrenaline, when you almost get into an accident, when you're fleeing from something, or you're about to get into a fight, or whatever the stress is, you get that rush of adrenaline. It stimulates your heart to push out more blood, and it stimulates your blood vessels to constrict, which will increases your blood pressure. And that happens very quickly, and that happens in order to try to get more blood and therefore more oxygen to places like your muscles. In terms of long-term effects, antidiuretic hormone, angiotensin II, and erythropoietin raise blood pressure when it's too low. And ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide, lowers blood pressure when it's too high. So here's how that kind of works. So first of all, ADH. If you remember ADH, it causes you to retain water, right? So this is released from your posterior pituitary in processes or in response to you being dehydrated. Now, part of being dehydrated is a decrease in blood volume. If you've ever donated blood, one of the things when you donate blood, one of the things you have to do is drink a lot of fluids that day. Later on that day, you'll feel incredibly thirsty. You'll go through, 5 times more water than you normally do. And it's because of this, right? It's because your posterior pituitary detects that decrease in blood volume, and it makes you more thirsty, okay? This hormone, antidiuretic hormone, causes you to conserve water by your kidneys, which prevents reduction in blood volume, right? You're trying to get the volume of your blood back up, so you got a lot of water that you're holding on to. This is also going to constrict your blood vessels to elevate your blood pressure. Angiotensin II is a little bit more of a convoluted pathway. When the blood pressure decreases, your kidney secretes this hormone called renin, and renin starts a chain reaction that converts angiotensin I to angiotensin II. Angiotensinogen, sorry, to angiotensin II. Angiotensin II stimulates cardiac output and arteriolar constriction, stimulates the release of ADH and aldosterone, stimulates thirst centers, and immediately increases blood pressure. So this is doing the same thing as ADH, and it's activating or releasing ADH. So again, your body doesn't just do one of these things, right? Your blood pressure decreases, your body's going to stimulate the production of ADH, which will make you more thirsty, which makes you drink more and hold on to water and increases your blood volume. But also, if that decrease in your blood pressure stimulates angiotensin II, it is also going to increase your cardiac output and cause you to release more ADH, right? Which is going to make you thirsty and increase your blood pressure. So these things are not happening one at a time. They're happening in conjunction with each other. Okay. And the third hormone that we mentioned is erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is released by the kidney when blood pressure drops or when plasma oxygen drops. So again, if you have low blood pressure, this hormone is released and it stimulates red blood cell production. So if you don't have much blood pressure, you're going to try to increase your blood volume, and you can do that by increasing either the plasma or the red blood cells, right? So if you increase both of those things, it should increase your blood volume. So this particular hormone is going to cause you to increase the red blood cells. The other two are going to cause you to increase the plasma, increase the liquid that's in the blood. All of them are going to increase your blood pressure, and this is going to improve the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. So this hormone is one that you may have heard about in the news when you hear about like Lance Armstrong doping and people blood doping. They're using a synthetic form of this hormone. So one of the many amazing things that your body does, your kidneys are filtering your blood. Every time your heart beats, your kidneys are filtering like a quarter of that blood. One of the things that your kidneys do is they monitor your oxygen levels. If your oxygen levels drop, your kidneys produce this hormone, erythropoietin, which goes to your bone marrow to tell your bone marrow to produce more blood cells, right? That's where we're producing blood cells in our bone marrow. Now, many of you have probably heard about, maybe fighters and other athletes going to a high altitude to train. Well, at a higher altitude, is there more oxygen or less oxygen?
Less.
Less. So the purpose of going to that higher altitude is that your kidneys will detect that you have less oxygen available. They will make this hormone. Your body will start making more red blood cells. If you have more red blood cells, you should be able to carry more oxygen around your body. Red blood cells stick around for 120 days, right? They stick around for about 4 months. So the thought is if you go to a high altitude and you train for a month or two, when you come back down closer to sea level for your fight or your race or whatever you're training for, you should have more endurance, right? Because your body built up more red blood cells. Now you have all those red blood cells going through your body, and they should all be carrying more oxygen, meaning you can get more oxygen to your muscles, you have more endurance. That's why people go to a high altitude to train. Now, if your opponent goes to that same place to train, it doesn't really cancels each other out, right? What the cyclists have done is they've used and abused a drug that does this. So there's a drug called EPO, right? It's a synthetic form of this hormone. And it's given to people who are like, cancer patients to help stimulate their red blood cell counts because their blood cell counts get really low. Sometimes with AIDS patients, it gets really low. So people who are really, really sick and need stimulation of red blood cells. What these people are doing, what some cyclists and some other athletes are doing is they're what's called blood doping. And so they are using this synthetic hormone as a drug. And what it's doing is it's causing an increase in the red blood cell production. So now, if Lance Armstrong uses your EPO-A is what they call it. If he's using that, then he should have a lot more red blood cells than any of his competitors, which means he should be able to carry more oxygen than his competitors, which means he should have more endurance because he's getting more oxygen to his muscles than his competitors. And that's what cyclists are doing. That's what I'm picking on cyclists because it's in the news more. But that's what athletes are doing when you hear about them blood doping. It's not that they want to take testosterone to build more muscle mass. They want to have more endurance, right? And this is the exact mechanism that they're using, right? And that's why people go to high altitude to train, which is a legal way to do it. But obviously you get a much stronger effect if you're using a drug versus going to a high altitude. You can get a much stronger effect on how many red blood cells you produce. And so that's the connection between this hormone and the amount of oxygen in your body.
Well, I have a question about that. Do that hurt your body? It's like it makes your blood viscous?
Yep,
and
exactly.
The pressure,
that's the danger. It makes your
heart
blood
pressure high?
Yep, exactly. It makes your blood more viscous. So your blood has more red blood cells going through it if you're abusing it, right? If you're using it because you don't have enough red blood cells, then that's fine. But when you're abusing it, you are making it so that you have more red blood cells in the same amount of liquid, which makes it thicker. And it makes it harder for your heart to pump that through your blood vessels, which increases your blood pressure. So then you're setting off a chain reaction of other side effects that can happen from abusing this. That's exactly what the side effects are.
So the
thick blood.
So the risk is higher than actually what they are trying to achieve.
Right. Well,
they're harming their body more.
Right. Well, that's what you have to weigh out, right? You have to weigh out how many millions of dollars am I going to make, and how worth it is it to me to take this health risk for that. Right. I mean, I think that's what you're weighing out probably. When you see.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. When you see professional athletes taking drugs to achieve their status, a lot of times it comes down to that. It comes down to, well, if I don't take this, then I can't sign that big contract and I can't make that money. And so, it's a risk that some people are willing to take. Okay, another hormone that regulates cardiovascular center, ANP, it's released by the heart itself. when blood pressure increases. So the other three that we talked about are when blood pressure decreases. This is actually released when blood pressure increases. So what happens is the atrial wall stretches. When the blood pressure increases, it stretches it just because there's so much blood coming back to that right atrium. The atrium kind of stretches. And so the effects of this is to increase sodium loss. So you're sending more sodium and therefore more water to your bladder. You're getting rid of more sodium. It's reducing your thirst, right? So it's not making you thirsty. The others are making you thirsty so that you drink water so that it increases the volume, which increases the pressure. In this case, you want to reduce the thirst, right? It's going to make you feel like you're satiated. You don't need any more to drink. It's going to block the release of those other three hormones, right, that we talked about. It's going to block the release of things like ADH and aldosterone because those are going to have the opposite effect. And it's going to stimulate arterial dilation. So instead of constriction, it's going to dilate those arteries. And the result is reduced blood volume and blood pressure. Right, so the other ones were all in response to low blood pressure, which again is less common. There's usually some other reason why you have low blood pressure, whereas this is much more common to have high blood pressure and to secrete ANP to go through these processes. Okay, so here is a chart just showing the hormonal regulation of blood pressure. Again, if it decreases, you've got the baroreceptors, you've got what's happening with the kidneys releasing EPO, right? You've got angiotensin 2 and ADH and aldosterone, everything else with the low blood pressure. With the high blood pressure, again, your heart is going to release ANP, and these are going to be the effects of release of ANP. In either case, you're hoping to restore that blood pressure to a normal static level, 120/80, something like that.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I've always noticed with my residents that anybody who has severe edema and they're put on a higher regimen of Lasix, we're also told to decrease their water intake, and that's always really confused me. Does that
so Lasix is a diuretic. So if you have edema, that is swelling due to water retention. Generally, a lot of times in the lymphatic system, so it's not getting returned to the bloodstream. So you're giving them Lasix to try to get rid of that excess water. And so you don't want them to keep drinking an excess of water because there's some reason that their body's not keeping up with their, with the amount of water to get rid of it.
I guess I just got confused because it's like, so it's making you lose water.
Yep.
And it's been like an argument, like they're so thirsty and I feel always so bad. Like you can only have, however many ounces, but yeah, that always kind of confused me because because
if you keep giving them the water, they're just going to continue to have the edema.
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason that their body's not getting rid of that. Whatever the breakdown is, whatever the situation is, there's a reason that their body isn't able to get rid of the water that they have. So
yeah, it's a dramatic decrease in intake of water. Yep.
Yeah.
Ugh. That's always rough when that happens because it does make them way more thirsty. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay.
I'm curious about how blood pressure. I'm curious about how blood pressure medication interacts with that. Was it called ANP? Sorry, what was that?
This one.
Last thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about the medications and where they are in these pathways. I know there are different blood pressure medications, and I don't know what they're stimulating. You know what I mean? If they're inhibiting those other things, or if they're, if they're inhibiting this, or if they're activating something like ADH or angiotensin. I'm not sure what they're doing.
And there's like blood pressure medications that have Lasix in it, HCTZ. So that's also, medications are very interesting.
Yeah, another complex topic.
Absolutely, yep. And I always bring it back to different residents who are on different regimens, and I always compare it to what we're learning. So it helps make more sense to me for sure. Yep.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm not sure, it probably depends on the medication, whether it's inhibiting this pathway or it's, stimulating one of these pathways. I'm not sure about. There's probably all different medications with that, right? Because it's such a big problem. Blood pressure is such a huge problem. So many people have high blood pressure is what I mean by that.
I have a quick question. It's
Yeah.
related to cardiac output. So with congestive heart failure, isn't it the kidney that actually get rid of the water?
No. So with congestive heart failure, it's more that it's usually more related to a breathing issue, right? It's related to the lungs kind of fill with fluid a little bit more, and so what happens is then it affects the blood flow going from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart, and that's usually kind of
Okay.
the effect of, that's what leads to congestive heart failure is that pathway.
Okay, so
It
that
has to do with
different
there not being enough
circulatory.
pressure. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Now I get it. So I forgot there are two circulatory. Yeah.
Right.
Thank
right.
you.
You're welcome. Okay, so here's another thing with exercise, right? Both cardiac output and pattern of blood distribution change. I think most people realize cardiac output changes, right? As you exercise, your heart's going to push out more blood. It's got more oxygen going to more muscles. That makes sense. But did you realize blood distribution changes? Your body actually changes by constricting some of those precapillary sphincters and dilating others. It changes where the blood flows. So as you're using oxygen, right? As you're using your skeletal muscles, they're using oxygen, they're consuming oxygen. When that happens, what your body does is it dilates the blood vessels, try to get more blood to those areas. So peripheral resistance decreases, those blood vessels dilate, and the blood flow through the capillaries and the veins is increased. And then what happens is there's more blood coming back to the heart because you're using your skeletal muscles more, and you're using your respiratory system more, which provides a pump as far as pressures, which we haven't gotten into yet. And all of that is going to cause more blood to come into the right atrium of your heart, which increases your venous return, which is going to just increase your cardiac output even more. So it's going to stretch your atrial, right, your right atrium, and that's going to increase your cardiac output. The increased cardiac output balances out decrease in peripheral resistance to maintain arterial pressures. So what also happens, and what I don't think I knew this for a long time, but shunting of blood flow away from non-essential organs happens when you're exercising. So we've got blood flow going to, think about how much blood flow we have going to our digestive system. There's a huge amount. But when you're exercising, all of those precapillary sphincters that are going to your digestive system are pretty much closed. Because what you want to do is you want to open up all the precapillary sphincters going to like your skeletal muscle, your arms, your legs. You only have 5 liters of blood in your body, right? So you don't want to, you can't send it everywhere, right? You have to pick and choose. And so when you're exercising or when you're using your muscles, your body doesn't know that you're exercising, but when you're using your muscles, your skeletal muscles, your body will actually shunt blood flow. It'll send more blood to those areas that are using oxygen and kind of ignore things like your digestive system at that point, or your urinary system, right? Your bladder. So that's what's happening when you're exercising, right? You're actually picking and choosing. Your body's picking and choosing where to actually send the blood. And what this does is it ensures adequate perfusion of heart and skeletal muscles. What it does is it makes sure, okay, I only have this much blood, so am I getting that blood to those skeletal muscles often enough to get oxygen there to allow them to make energy, right? Which I think is, it's pretty amazing that you can actually do that, that your body actually, recognizes that and constricts some of the precapillary sphincters and dilates others in response to exercise. Okay, so then we have response to hemorrhage, right? A large bleeding event. There's both short-term and long-term responses. So loss of blood usually causes a decrease in blood pressure. And so your carotid and aortic reflexes, which we talked about, they sense that decrease and they increase cardiac output and peripheral resistance. And your venous compensation can restore arterial pressure even after a loss of 15 to 20% of blood volume. So basically you constrict all your blood vessels, you try to push more blood back to your heart, you're trying to constrict even the veins to push more blood back to your heart. to try to make up for the fact that you've lost blood, you've lost the volume of blood. Your cardiac output is maintained by increasing your heart rate. So you still want to maintain your cardiac output, remembers how much blood is leaving your heart per minute. And so now you have less blood volume leaving your heart. So you have to speed up how many times it squeezes per minute to kind of maintain that same amount of cardiac output. And sympathetic activation is going to cause these blood vessels to constrict and causes the release of things like adrenaline and ADH, which are going to increase your blood pressure. So this would be like, again, like if you give blood, right? Your heart rate's going to go up, your blood pressure is going to go up, you're going to be thirsty after you give blood. And it's because your body's trying to recover from that loss of blood volume.
Do you know what that blood volume is? That's what I was just going to ask about the percentage of blood volume lost when you give blood.
When you give blood, you give a pint, and you have what, 5
liter?
liters? So that's like
pint,
a tenth,
I mean, yeah.
right?
Oh, okay. All right. Yep.
A tenth of your blood.
I think so. Yep.
Right? Somebody double check that, but I think that's right.
I mean, I'm not great at math, but that makes sense. Yeah.
So long-term response may take several days to restore the blood volume to normal. So that's the immediate response is what I just talked about. And then long-term, recall of fluids from interstitial space is triggered by a decrease in capillary blood pressure. Basically, the amount of pressure that's inside your capillaries will decrease so that fluids from around the capillaries are flowing back into the capillaries. Remember, capillaries are the only blood vessels where things can flow in and out of them. The two hormones, ADH and aldosterone, will keep continuing to promote fluid retention. So you'll be thirsty for a couple of days, and you'll have more red blood cells. Your kidneys will trigger erythropoietin, which will cause you to make more red blood cells so that you can get more oxygen around your body. So all of these are leading to an increase in blood volume and blood pressure. So this would be kind of what happens, a couple of days after you give blood. You would still be thirsty. Your body would be trying to produce more red blood cells to catch up. Your body would be retaining water, try to, again, catch up to that volume that you lost. So then we get to, things that we already knew, the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. The cardiovascular system is divided into two circuits. When you go through the right side of the heart to the lungs and back, that's the pulmonary circuit. So right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries, lungs, pulmonary veins. That's your pulmonary circuit. It ends at the left atrium. The left atrium begins your systemic circuit. Systemic circuit is left side of the heart to the body and back. So it's left atrium, left ventricle, aorta, all these arteries, arterioles, capillaries, back through veins, back through your vena cava. And as soon as you get to the right atrium, that starts the pulmonary circuit again. Okay, so here's a chart just showing that. Again, in the middle is your heart. And so right atrium to right ventricle, and then going up here towards the lungs, that's pulmonary circuit. The pulmonary veins are still part of the pulmonary circuit. Once you get to the left atrium, that begins the systemic circuit. Left atrium, left ventricle. It leaves the left ventricle. And these are all systemic circuit arteries that are going to your upper limbs, your brain, your kidneys, your spleen, your digestive organs, your gonads, your lower limbs. And then all of those are flowing back into one large vein called the vena cava that goes back to the right atrium. You actually have an inferior vena cava coming from below the heart and a superior vena cava coming from above the heart. So again, this is just showing that in words again. Pulmonary circuit, deoxygenated blood, right side of the heart to the lungs and back. Okay. And systemic circuit is mostly what we've been talking about. Systemic circuit supplies oxygenated blood to all parts of the body, so not the pulmonary circuit. So you're talking left side of the heart to the arteries and back. Now what they show in this picture are a lot of the systemic arteries. Okay, and what I need to do, one of the other things I need to do tonight is make a list of the ones that I'm holding you responsible for, because you can get really carried away with this, and I don't want that. I'd much rather know that you kind of understand how these things work rather than just memorizing a million names. Many of the names of the arteries and the veins have to do with where they run in the body. So they're named either for like a bone that they're near or something like that, an area of the body that they're near. So you can see things like what's going to happen is the blood's going to leave the left ventricle of the heart, go up through the ascending aorta into the aortic arch. The first branch off the aortic arch is the brachiocephalic. If you think back to words and what they mean for regions of the body, brachio is the upper arm, cephalic is head. So the brachiocephalic trunk is going to lead to the arm, the upper arm, and the head. And it leads to what's called a subclavian artery. Subclavian means right below the clavicle, subclavian, okay, which turns into the axillary artery, which is the axillary area of your body, if you remember, is your armpit, which turns into the brachial artery, which is your upper arm, which branches into a radial and an ulnar artery, right, and then palmar arteries. The second branch is this left common carotid, which will go up towards your head and neck and branch into an external and an internal. And then the third branch is your your left subclavian, sorry. Your left subclavian turns into all those same things on the left side, the axillary, the brachial, the radial, and the ulnar. Okay, and then the aorta kind of curves down below the heart and goes down towards your trunk and then your legs. And there are some big branches coming off the trunk. I'm not going to have you memorize all of these, but one of the ones that I want to point out are the renals, right? Those are big. They're going to your kidneys. About 25% of your blood every time your heart beats goes through your kidneys to get filtered. And then this aorta branches to go down to the legs. Those are called iliacs. And so you have the right common iliac and the left common iliac, which when you get down a little further branch into an internal iliac and an external iliac. Okay. And again, that branches, goes further to become the femoral, and then the popliteal behind your knee, and the posterior tibial and the fibular are named for the bones. And so I'll get a list of these going, right? So that you have to only memorize a certain number of them. But realize that if you know what those words mean, a lot of times you can figure out where those arteries are going. Now remember, these are just the arteries. Back. Right, so we've got the aorta, the ascending aorta. Here are the branches off of it, right? Internal, external carotids. Here's a picture of those. Then there's some major arteries of the trunk, off the descending aorta, the phrenic arteries, the gonadal arteries, adrenals, renals, lumbar, and then it branches into the common iliacs, which branch further into the internal and externals. And so again, I'm going to send out a list of those so that you're not trying to memorize every single one of these. Right, and here's a nice tree of the trunk. I wish I could find one of this book doesn't have one of the arm, I don't think. But you can see that this is going down the middle, the aorta, and then you can see where the branches are, right? So which branch comes off of it. You can see, for instance, the celiac trunk branches into these three arteries, and it keeps going like that to go down into the leg. Right. Then we get to systemic veins. So you'll have to know the names of the arteries. You'll have to know the names of the veins. I'll get together a certain list. The arteries and the veins that run parallel usually have the same names. So you have a brachial artery, you have a brachial vein. You have an ulnar artery, you have an ulnar vein, right? They're running in the same area of the body, it's just that arteries are going away from the heart, veins are going towards the heart. There are a few differences. Okay. The major veins in the neck have different names than the arteries. The arteries that are carrying blood to the head are called carotid arteries. The veins that are coming back are called jugular veins. I don't know why. I don't have a good reason for why they're named differently, but they are. They run almost in the same area, but they have different names. Arteries are usually located deeper. Veins are usually located near the surface, superficial. So when you go to a doctor or a nurse and you get your blood drawn, they're usually sticking you in a vein because the veins are closer to the surface of your body. In addition to the names of the veins being the same as the names in the arteries, you have more veins. So in the arm and the leg, not only do you have the axillary, the brachial, the ulnar, the radial, but you have a few additional veins. And that's because they have this problem of getting blood under low pressure back to your heart. So you've got more of them to try to bring that blood back to your heart. So there are a few veins that you have to know in addition to the names of the arteries. One that I'll point out here, and so I'll zoom in on this a little bit, right? So you can see the axillary and the brachial and the radial and the ulnar, but you also have things like the cephalic and the basilic, right, which are in the upper arm. One that I want to point out is called the median cubital. It's right here. It's right here. It goes across the elbow. The reason I want to point that out is that's the one that they usually will draw blood from. If you get blood drawn, it's the one that's at the center of your elbow that you can see. That's called the median cubital vein. And so that's one of the ones that I know that I'll have you guys know when I go through and list the names of the veins and the arteries that you need to know. Right. So here again, you can see some of the branches coming off of there. So they're, for the most part, they're the same, but in addition to being all the same names, there are more veins than arteries. So there are extra veins that have extra names. Okay, and here are the tributaries, all leading back to the vena cava. So if you look at these arrows, when we looked at the arteries, which were red, they were all going away from the heart. All of these arrows are going back toward the heart. They're all leading blood back toward the vena cava, which leads back to the right atrium. So here's the superior vena cava back to the right atrium of the heart. Here's the inferior vena cava back to the right atrium of the heart. Okay. And so it goes through some of these. So now, as far as the names of the heart arteries and the veins, I'm going to, again, tonight, I'm going to come up with a list of those so that you're not memorizing all of those. But there's one last thing that I want to point out before I let you go. And that is all of the capillaries that are associated with your digestive system. So for good or for bad, anything that we eat or drink gets into our intestines, right? Here's our stomach. Here's part of our small intestine, part of our large intestine. Anything that you eat or drink gets into your intestines, and it gets into your bloodstream really quickly. You can see associated with your intestine, there are a lot of capillaries. So, you know, that's a good thing for absorbing vitamins. That's a great thing for absorbing glucose. Maybe not a great thing for absorbing certain medications that you take, right? Or alcohol or other toxins that you may eat. So instead of returning that blood from your large and small intestines directly back to the vena cava, there's your vena cava right here in blue. The vena cava goes back to your right atrium. So instead of returning that blood directly to the vena cava, what happens is these veins going from your digestive system all lead up to the liver. Okay, so you can see you've got one here, you've got a second one here, and you've got a third one over here from the spleen. They all lead back to your liver. This vein leading back to your liver is called the hepatic portal vein. Okay, and there's three veins that come together to form the hepatic portal vein: the superior mesenteric, the inferior mesenteric, and the splenic. Right, superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric, splenic. They all are flowing towards your heart, so they all flow back into what's called the hepatic portal vein. All of that blood gets filtered in your liver. Your liver filters out whatever could be toxic, right? Your liver can filter out. You've probably heard, you know, alcoholics end up with liver damage, right? Or there are all these reasons that you could end up with liver damage. It could be a medication that you have to take for years that your liver has to work really hard to keep that out of your bloodstream. Once your liver filters that blood, your liver then sends that blood through these veins called hepatic veins to your vena cava. So hepatic portal is quote unquote dirty blood coming into your liver. Clean blood leaves through the hepatic veins to go through your inferior vena cava into your heart. This entire thing is called the hepatic portal system. It's a portal system, right? You're not directly returning. You've got a network of capillaries here and a second network of capillaries there. That's what a portal system really means, is that you're going from arteries to veins to another set of veins, then back to the vena cava. So you've got two sets of capillaries. You're taking all the blood that's coming from your digestive system, you're filtering it at your liver, and then you're sending it back to your heart once it's been cleaned. Does anybody know the prefix of anything to do with your liver? It's usually HEPA, right? So hepatic portal system. And if you think of things like in your home, you might have a HEPA filter. The cells in the liver are called hepatocytes. HEPA really means that it's filtering. That's where they get the name for HEPA filters. So anytime you see HEPA, think of it as something that's filtering, right? And that's your liver. So I wanted to point out that hepatic portal system. That's another case where the veins and the arteries are going in different areas, sort of. From your aorta, you have a splenic artery, an inferior mesenteric artery, and a superior mesenteric artery. So you have arteries with these three names. But then the veins with those three names flow back into a hepatic portal vein, which is only in the venous system. It's not in the arterial system, which flows into your liver, which then flows through hepatic veins to your inferior vena cava. Questions about that? No. So again,
This is one of my favorite diagrams.
Is it? Kind of, you know, it's
I
clear
feel
on
like
how
this one just shows like it gets really to the point in a way that some of the other ones weren't for me. I don't know. This one for some reason just really like brings it home how much is happening with the liver.
Yeah, exactly. Your liver is your biggest internal organ, and a lot of people don't realize that. You might be surprised when you do the dissection of how big the liver is on the animals that you dissect. But your liver's, it's doing a ton. It's trying to make sure that you don't get toxins into your bloodstream from what you eat and drink. And so I really wanted to make sure that you guys understand that. Now some of the tributaries off of these three large veins I don't care much about, so those aren't going to be on the list of things that I want you to know. But you can bet these three large ones will be. Okay. All right. Any questions about stuff that we covered today?
I have a question, but it's not that. I just want to hear it again. So there is an exam or quiz to do tomorrow. Did you say you move it to a different day? Because there's one tomorrow and there's one Sunday.
Right. So that is the right. So the one tomorrow is the cardiovascular system, which originally it was due last week, but I knew that I wouldn't be through with it till today. And then the one due Sunday is on the lymphatic system. So those are the correct days for those quizzes. Yep.
All right. So there is a quiz tomorrow. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
But there will
Thank
also
you.
be a test. There will also be a test over this weekend on the cardiovascular and lymphatic systems, which I didn't post yet. I'll post that tonight or tomorrow.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So tomorrow we'll get into the lymphatic system. Lymphatic system is closely related to the cardiovascular system. It's returning a lot of fluid back to your cardiovascular system. That's its biggest role. It has a role in immune system too, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But we'll go through those slides tomorrow. And please let me know if you have any questions. Like I said tonight, I'm really going to straighten out all of this, the syllabus for the rest of the semester and the grades and all of that. So you should be able to look tomorrow and see an accurate representation of where you are and how you stand in the class. Any questions? All right, well, have a great night. And I hope nobody loses power. I know they're saying high winds and nasty storms. So have a good night, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.